Okay, tremendous. So welcome back to everybody as we continue our journey through Sefer Sichos Haran, B'siyata D'Shmaya. By far our longest ongoing series, already for a few years now. B'chazei Hashem, I was just looking through the Sefer to prepare for this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are, and it was beautiful. We've done a lot together. For those who have been learning with us from the beginning, some of you here, some of you who are going to be listening to this recording, Ashreinu, what a privilege. What a privilege that we've managed to accomplish what we've managed to accomplish. So we jump back in today, B'siyata D'Shmaya. I'm just going to share my screen so we can see the sources inside. And we continue with Sichos Haran, Kuf Mem Zayin, 147. So last week, or the last time we learned, I'm not sure if we actually had, no, last week I was in Manchester. So the previous week we went very deeply into 146, which we talked a lot about the war and about what was going on then in the current events aspect of things. And now we are going to continue with Kuf Mem Zayin. And if you'll remember, we are still very much learning through the lessons that provide the anecdotal information and background to the various stories and teachings that Rebbe Nachman taught in Likutei Moharan, in Sipurei Maasiyos, and this is no exception. So here we jump into 147, where Reb Nosson is narrating, and Reb Nosson writes, Shamati mi ish echad me'anshenu. He said, I heard from one of our people, one of the Breslover Chasidim, Sha'amar, that he said to Reb Nosson, Shekoidim shesipur Rabbeinu Zal HaMaaseh Shel HaMelech Shahir Ben Shekula Me'avonim Toivos, that prior to Rabbi Nachman's teaching the story, which is in Sipurei Maasiyos, but Sipur Hey, of the story of the king who had a son who was completely made out of gemstones. So fascinating, very, very deep, psychologically deep story of jealousy between the princess and the prince. And ultimately, he had inside of him, he had a tremendous gems that were embedded into his skin. It's a remarkable story. Ayin Sham, you can take a look over there. I think it's all translated on Sefaria, so it's easily accessible. Amar Koidem Shasiper. So these Breslover Chasidim told Reb Nosson that before Rabbi Nachman said the story, he said, Ani Yodea Maisa, I know a story, Sheyesh ba Kol Hashem Shel Mem Beis. I know a story that contains the mystical encoding of the 42-letter name of Hashem, which is the name of Ana B'Koach, right? So all of those Rashi Tevos, if you take a look at Ana B'Koach in the Siddur, so all the way to the left, at the end of the stanza, you'll see they bring the Rashi Tevos of the various words. That's called the Shem Mem Beis, the 42-letter name. I've given a number of shiurim on that name in the context of our Shabbos series, when we were beginning to learn Ana B'Koach, so we spent a very long time going very deeply into Ana B'Koach, and it's a remarkable resource if you're interested in discovering really not just the deeper meaning of Ana B'Koach, but a whole theology essentially through the framework of this short little tefillah. Recommended that you go on YouTube. I think I have it as a separate playlist, so you can just search up Ana B'Koach. And over there in the early shiurim, the first 2 or 3 shiurim, we delved very deeply into this name and the energy of Gevura that it represents, how it's connected to the creation of the world. So we see the letters Mem and Beis, even though it's obviously a number, because it's 42, but it's also Rashi Tevos, an acronym for the words Maaseh Bereshis, because it's the name with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the whole world, and that's the name that's encoded into the tefillah of Reb Nachman ben Hakana, called Ana B'Koach. Be that as it may, said Rabbi Nachman, I know a story that contains all of the letters of the 42-letter name of Hashem. And then Rabbi Nachman proceeded to tell the story of the prince that was made out of precious gemstones. But even so, says Reb Nosson, we can't be sure if this is the story that Rabbi Nachman was talking about, or whether he had another story in mind. We don't know. But this is just, he felt it necessary to record this just in case. And Reb Nosson says, I heard from Rabbi Nachman himself many years ago, Sha'amar, that he said, Sha'abal Shem Tov Zal, that the Baal Shem, which was Rabbi Nachman's great-grandfather, because Rabbi Nachman's mother was called Fega. Fega was the daughter of Udal, and Udal's mother, or father rather, was the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov said, he also knew a story that contained all the 42 mystical letters of this name of Hashem. And then Rebbe Nachman and Reb Nosson had a conversation about this name of Hashem and what it signifies and the energy that it represents. Vishal I see, and Rebbe Nachman enlisted my help, said Reb Nosson, limtza perish b'lashon laz al shtei oisios vav tzadi shenimtza b'shem. Because you have Ushmat Sakasenu Yodea Talumos, right? Toward the very, very end of the name, there are these letters Vav and Sadi as part of the Shem Mem Beis that become the words in Anabakoyach Ushma Sakasenu, Vav and Sadi. And Reb Nachman wanted from Reb Nosson that he should help him to find some kind of allusion to these letters in Yiddish. Like, how could we, he was trying to find some kind of reference in the Yiddish language, like a word that's the combination of Vav and Sadi, to see as some kind of reference to the letter Vav and Sadik in the Shem Mem Beis. And Reb Nosson says, I couldn't think of anything that's Utz or Vatz, or these two letters don't come together in Yiddish to produce any word. But why did Rabbi Nachman want this? Essentially, it means that he understood the deepest meanings of all the other letters. He was missing the code to be able to apply and to find a reference to these two letters on every strata of existence, which includes the Yiddish or German language, to be able to find it even there. So that's what Rebbe Nachman was trying to work through. And Reb Nosson says, ultimately, if he couldn't, I couldn't, right? And he wasn't able to help him. Okay, here we come to Sichos Haran 148. When Reb Nachman was telling over the incredible epic, really an epic tale of the Baal Tefillah, of the Master of Prayer. Again, highly encouraged, if you're able to have access either to purchase the Sefer, Sipurei Maisios in Hebrew, if you can handle that, or it's translated into English as Rabbi Nachman's Tales by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Highly recommended. Even if we don't understand anything, they're just fascinating, just as literature, if we could denigrate it to that level, obviously it's so much more than that, but it's just like Rebbe Nachman himself said, at the end of the day, they're just nice stories, and they're wonderful to read, and they're wonderful to reflect on, and they're so rich in their imagery and in their psychological depth, and it's a phenomenon. It's a whole other window into Rebbe Nachman for those of us who have been learning Likutei Moharan, and we're exploring the brilliance and the Torah depth and the intellectual aspect. So the stories is just like, it's a whole other facet of the Rebbe. And so it's very, very important to take both together and really understand Rebbe Nachman for the multifaceted diamond that he was and that he is. So after he had told the story of the Master of Prayer, which in short is basically the story of a Baal Tefillah, which in the context of the story means a Master of Prayer, which is like the Tzaddik Emes, who basically goes around and he's trying to build a community of people who the only thing they want to do is serve Hashem. And he goes and speaks to people who have all different kinds of motivations, and there are many different kingdoms, and each kingdom esteems what it esteems, and some people, all different taivas, all different kinds of physical gratification that they deify in their countries. And he has a whole back and forth with a country of wealth, without getting into the whole story about it, but it's essentially a very biting critique of capitalism and a capitalistic society. Not capitalism as a whole, but a purely capitalist society without any kind of morals, other than just making money, where eventually it leads to the most grotesque caricatures in terms of what we're willing to sacrifice and what could happen to a society when the most important value is wealth, right? And that's Rebbe Nachman expresses that. And then slowly but surely we learn that the Baal Tefillah, the Master of Prayer, is only one of a whole band of extraordinary individuals who were all part of a kingdom that was disbanded by a hurricane. And all of there are 10 figures who obviously are representative of the 10 spheros. It's extraordinarily deep, but they all get disbanded, and there's a gibor, there's a poet, there's all these different aspects of the king's men, all right, that are scattered all around the world, and slowly but surely they begin to reconstitute, and they come back together, and they discover the king, and they discover the queen, and it's an epic. It's a remarkable tale. So highly encouraged to check that out. It's free. You can just Google it. It's on Sefaria, so there's really no excuse. So over there. So at one point in the story, they read from the chronicles of what had happened when there was a hurricane, and it just destroyed the whole entire kingdom and scattered everything. So after he told the story, Rebbe Nachman was like almost testing them, and he said to them, Chronicles, which are chronicles, very similar word. Who was it in the story that read from the chronicle? About all of the kitas, about all of the different groups, which disbanded on account of the hurricane. Who read that? So we told him, it was one of the very strong men whose king was the original Gibar, was the original warrior of the original king, that because they valued physical strength over anything else, they found this incredible warrior, they made him the king, and it was one of his people, it was one of the Gibarim that were part of the group of the Gibar who read from the chronicle. That's what they answered him. That one of those Gibarim had read the chronicle to the Baal Tvila, V'nena b'roshai, and he nodded, and he said, Shekenu. He said, yes, you got it right. So why did he do that? Because everything the Rebbe did, every movement the Rebbe made was extraordinary meaning and secrets. There was no waste. There was nothing. Every single tiny detail was conscious, super conscious. So v'hivanu midvarav, we understood, says Reb Nosson, sheyesh b'zeh mechuven gadol ma'od. We understood this is a very, very, very important thing. Why? It was specifically one of the warriors who told this over. And from there you can learn that these are not like the kind of stories that, like, if you get the general gist, it's okay. It's not. Every tiniest detail is packed with Kabbalistic meaning and intention, and therefore significance, and it's crucially important when telling over this story to tell it over with all of the details, because you see Rebbe Nachman asked about what would appear to be an arbitrary detail, like who cares who it was that said it, but no, it wasn't arbitrary. Rebbe Nachman wanted them to recognize and realize it mattered. Mechuvan gadol ma'od ma'ashe'ena peyachal ledaber, which no mouth could express, v'alev lachshav, and no heart and mind could contemplate. It's endless depth, mysteries. Rebbe Nachman's whole thing was mysteries, total mystery. In Rebbe Nachman, you don't try to get clarity. You just go deeper into the mystery, and you close the sefer with humility, and you say, okay, I got what I got, but I know that there's so much more. And that's the energy of the Rebbe. It's endless. And I'm remembering there was a clip that was going around a little bit ago of Reb Shlomo Carlebach. It's just one clip of many, where he was sitting with his chaver and he was trying to play them a niggin, and he got like really frustrated that they were like, instead of they like 3 or 4 notes at the very end of a phrase, they were messing up and they weren't singing exactly the way that he's saying it, and he was getting very frustrated with them. And he was trying to explain to them that it's something similar. His music isn't stam. It's not stam music. Every note is exactly intentional where it needs to be. Maybe there was some spiritual kavanah in a higher way. Maybe he felt that if that's the way that it came down from Shemayim, then who are we to alter it? But it was something he was very, very makbid about, extremely makbid about. And so this is something that we should be very sensitive to. If we are reading the stories, it gives you a greater sense of gravity to understand that really every detail, no matter how arbitrary it seems, no matter how secondary, every tiniest detail has incredible meaning and is worthy of contemplation and is worthy of study. Let's move on to the next teaching, Sichos Haran Kuf Mem Tes. And here we begin like a very lengthy piece, and it's like a series of pieces that are all, we'll see how far we get, that are all talking about the revelation of one of the most remarkable, maybe the most famous and remarkable and mysterious of all of Rebbe Nachman's tales, which is the very last tale, which is called the Seven Beggars. or in Hebrew, the Shiva Betlers, the 7 beggars, Shiva Kaptzanim. And it's this incredible story that's really a container for stories within stories within stories within stories, and drags you into the most imaginative and for lack of a better word, trippy, just like tripped out visions and images and dynamics and conditions and problems and solutions. It's the 7 beggars is a whole world in and of itself. Like, even if Rebbe Nachman didn't reveal anything else, and he just revealed the 7 beggars, he would already be, just one of the most original, novel, tremendous Jewish scholars and thinkers and Rebbes of all time. Because it's really a whole world, the Shiva Betler. So here, Reb Nosson tells over the story of how that story came to be revealed. Okay, so he says, Hamaisa shel Shivim Betlers hanitfesas b'sipor Maisi Sipur Kama Yamim. All of the different aspects of this story were told over many days. Ubechol pam sipur inin hashayach lazeh shesipur mimenu. Shal yidei zeh hischil l'saper hamaisa. Like we've learned in the past, many of Rebbe Nachman's teachings weren't they didn't appear to be planned out. Many of them seem to have been formulated in the spur of the moment, or very shortly after, different dynamics that were taking place within the group of Hasidim, a dream that someone had, a conversation that they were having with the Hasidim, and among that and amidst that, Rebbe Nachman would start to reveal this whole structure of Torah that was all directly addressing and encoding the dreams and the different aspects of what was taking place in real life. And the Rebbe was almost as if tearing away the curtain and revealing the spiritual energy behind it in a most remarkable way. And the stories were similar. The stories had a similar dynamic. So here he says, B'tchila v'lel Shabbos, originally on Lel Shabbos, hischel al yedei ha-tabaki, or tabak la'aracha, the shmek tabak, right, the smelling tobacco that they had, shalakach mi'ish me'anashav, that Rebbe Nachman took from one of the people who had given it to him, one of the Hasidim. V'nizkar b'yiger sheshalachti ani l'chaveri she'higi liyad azal, v'kasavti lo shiyeh b'simcha. Az dibra mizeh. Right? And in the letter that I sent to my friend, to deliver to Rebbe Nachman, v'kasavti lo shiyeh b'simcha, right, that he should be joyous. And then they started speaking about simcha, about joy. So Anava Amar, again, almost spontaneously, because everything by the Rebbe flowed, there was nothing like sort of planned, it was just flow, like total flow. So suddenly they were just arbitrarily speaking about joy, because that was written in Reb Nosson's letter. He said, Anava Amar ani asap lechem echa yusmechem. He said, now I will tell you how they once used to rejoice. And this is how it's printed in many editions of the story of the 7 beggars. It begins with this introduction, Ani asapar lechem echa yusmechem. I will now tell you when they used to rejoice. But in other manuscripts that are more accurate, there's an addition to that sentence. It says, not only I will now tell you how they used to rejoice, but now I will tell you how they used to rejoice mitoich hamarashchara, within the depression, and there's depth to that. And they used to rejoice in the sadness. Like even within the sadness, there's an aspect of rejoicing. It's a very, very deep thing. Okay, the hischila sapra maisa, and then he began to tell the story. And the story begins basically with a boy and a girl who get lost in the forest, and they're wandering, and the little food that they have runs out. And each day, another beggar, who's really a beggar but also a cripple, comes by them and gives them food and supports them. And each one of the cripples is crippled with a different handicap. There's the one without feet. There's the one with a crooked neck. There's the one who's blind. There's the one who's deaf. All the different kinds of beggars. Each one has a different handicap, and they're all leaving them and supporting them and giving them bread. And then eventually, the beggars, it suggests that they should get married. And they make for them a wedding underneath the ground, which is probably also why Rebbe Nachman said, according to the second version, now I will tell you how they rejoiced within the marashchara. It's literally in the ground. And they cover over the pit with some straw and with some branches, which is an aspect, according to the Mefarshim, who explain the story. It's an aspect of Sukkos, sitting in the sukkah and looking up. It's like a little space within the ground. And the depth of what that means, v'yisam ach sameach, like even v'yisa ach sameach, even when we're under the floor, which is the spiritual energy of Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon, who reveals the secrets of the Torah, the chedvasa de araisa, buried under the ground, right, buried in sand up to his neck. But they make a wedding for this couple, and on each of the days of the Sheva Brachas, another one of the 7 beggars, right, who are aligning with the 7 days of Sheva Brachas, visit the couple, and they give them their own handicap as a gift. Because it turns out, and this itself is just one of the most remarkable dynamics of Rebbe Nachman's teachings, it turns out that their handicap was actually their greatest strength. Which, of course, even if you take nothing else from the story of the 7 beggars, which is packed with meaning and insight, just that message, right? More generally speaking, that actually the things that we think are handicapping us, the things that by which we think we're crippled, are really great gifts. They give that gift to the couple, and then they explain where they got the gift from, what the meaning of the gift is, and each one tells a story, sometimes stories within stories. So it's a pretty lengthy story when you get through all of them. It's basically 7 stories within one, but it's even more than that. And so the Rebbe says, V'sipar kol haschalos ha'maisa, so Rabbi Nachman began and told the whole beginning of the story, ad seif ha'maisa shel yom rishon, shel ha'betla shel iver, until he stopped after the story of the first day of Sheva Brachas, which was the gift of the beggar, shel iver, who was blind. V'chol zeh b'leil Shabbos Kodesh. All of this was on Friday night. Reb Nosson says, I wasn't present. I was in my home far away in Nemerov. On that Tuesday, a friend of mine, of ours, the Breslov Hasidim, came to visit me in Nemerov. And he told me the beginning of the story that Rebbe Nachman had told, including the first day of Sheva Brachas of the blind beggar. And Reb Nosson says, V'amati marid u'mishtaimim. And I stood there trembling and astounded. I already heard many wondrous stories from Rebbe Nachman. Again, this is the last of Sipurei Maasiyos. This story is a different level. This is Mashu Acher. It really belongs, like I mentioned already, it belongs in a class on its own. It's something else. So immediately he says, I traveled to Breslov, ubasi lebeis Rabbeinu Zal. And I came to Rabbi Nachman's home, be'eshay sagar b'chadra kvar. He was already closed up for the night in his private room. Uba Biker, so in the morning, Shu Yom Revi, because it was literally that day. It's like, I have to be there. Like, something's happening, something's being revealed. So he quickly left Nemerov and he went to Breslov. And so, but he couldn't get in that night because it was already nighttime. The Rebbe was not seeing visitors. The next morning, on Wednesday morning, Shu Yom Revi, nechnasi etzle v'dibarti imay harbe. I entered into the Rebbe's room and we spoke for a long time. I told him current events, different things that I had heard, things that were happening in the world. And then Rebbe Nachman began to tell the story, or to speak about the story that he had begun to reveal on Shabbos. Va'amar, listen to this, Rebbe Nachman said to Reb Nosson, he couldn't wait to tell the end of the story. What happened on all the other nights of the Sheva Brachas. A different part of the story that begins with a king who gives over the kingdom into the hands of his son while he was still alive. This is a whole separate part of the story. And the most remarkable thing is that Rebbe Nachman did not finish the story. The first story in Sipurei Maasiyos, which is the story of the lost princess, and the last story of Sipur Maisis, which is the story of the seven beggars, do not have endings. He did not tell the ending, which is very, very deep, because the ending of both of these stories is the coming of Mashiach, is the Geula, is the Tikkun Ha'achron, and he couldn't reveal that. So it's almost as if Rebbe Nachman is saying, I can't wait for the day when I'll be able to tell the end. V'amar li az, and then he told me, Shekain b'chol yoyim v'yoyim yizayim yamishta, meaning he sort of sketched out the rest of the story, that each night of the 7 days of the Sheva Brachas, b'chol yom echam Sheva Betlers, one of the 7 cripples, one of the 7 beggars, come obercham and bless the young couple, but also lahem matana l'drasha, and they give them a gift. V'gam sipar imi meseder asipar shel zakein balei zikaron shel shamati inin kaseder beber yafa mipi chaveri. And then he told me also the details of that original story from the first night of the Sheva Brachas, which was the story of the blind beggar that had to do with memory, and a bunch of elders who each one is trying to say how old they are because they're able to remember even further back. Without getting into that now, again, we're not learning the story, but ayin sham. Uberli huzal ba'atzmik sas kaseder, and Rebbe Nachman again just clarified some of the details that he said he hadn't heard properly prior. And he spoke very deeply about the blind beggar that didn't remember anything, because he was the youngest of the bunch, but really he was the oldest, because he was able to remember further back in the development, even long before any of the other people were able to remember. And that's where he was given his gift. Garnished. He was so deep that he was able to say, I don't know anything. I don't remember anything at all. Or I remember nothing. He remembers when he didn't even exist. He was able to tap in with his consciousness to a realm even prior to the development of his own personal consciousness. And that was considered to be a great wonder. Says Reb Nosson, I tried to convince him, can you tell me the story of the second? It's like a child, there's something so childlike about it. It's like a kid who just wants to hear the next chapter. It's like, no, that's for a different day. So he begged Rebbe Nachman, please teach me and tell me the story of the second day, but v'loi also biyadi. In middle of talking, I guess it was midday, it was lunchtime, and the Gabbai came in, and he said, Rebbe, it's time to eat. They set the table, and I had to leave. While Rebbe Nachman ate, I had to go out. Then Rebbe Nachman said that he wanted to take a nap a little bit after he ate. After his nap, I came back, and I entered into the Rebbe, and I stood before him, again. We were schmoozing about different things that were happening in the world, and we spoke about Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev that Reb Nosson had visited. And Reb Nosson told Rebbe Nachman that everywhere he went, he just heard people were saying they lacked so much. Everybody was missing things. That even the wealthiest of people, everyone has a void, everyone has a lack, everyone is seeking something. And nobody really knows what they're seeking, because the more that they try to fill it, the emptier they feel. And this was the condition of the world then, and obviously, it's the condition of our world now. And then I said this pasuk in Koheles, Gamas ha'olam nasam b'libam, v'b'liyah shaloyim tza'adam as ha'maisa asher asa likim v'reish v'ad soif. This also, I've placed the world within them. And the human being is not able to fathom as ha'maisa asher asa likim, this story that Hashem is unfolding v'reish v'ad soif from the beginning until the end. So once I said this pasuk that had the word maisa in it, Anu Huzal, Rebbe Nachman announced quickly, this is our Maisa. The take of Shal, and he immediately says, so where are we in this story? And I was, it says Reb Nosson, like I went out of my kalim, like we're going to reveal, because Reb Nosson understood what these stories were. He understood the whole history relied on the unfolding of these tales. He understood this was a historic occurrence. That's why he's reacting so viscerally. Otherwise, like, calm down. Like, what's the big deal? You know, so he's telling a story. It's beautiful, but like, Reb Nosson understood what these stories are in ways that I don't understand what these stories are. The little bit that I don't know. But because look at his reaction, right? So when Rebbe Nachman says, where are we holding in the story? So ve'ishavti bebahala, like he says, v'nefhalti, I was like astonished, astounded, v'nefhalti, confused, bewildered. Takef miroiba kisufin, from the gagu, from the yearning, shahayli l'shmayas, I said I was longing to hear the next installment of the tale. Ve'ishavti bebahala shanu emdemi amasheni, and I said, the second day. Anava Amar, and then he announced, and he said, Bayoyim Hasheni Chazu v'nizgagu. And then he continued to tell the whole story of the second day. V'sipar az b'yayim revi'i kol ha'maisa shel yom hasheni. So on that Tuesday, he told the whole story of the second day of Sheva Brachos. Ve'achar kach b'lel Shabbos, on the following Friday night, he told the story shel yom shlishi revi, of the third day and the fourth day of Sheva Brachos. V'achar kach b'yayim rishon, and then on the following Sunday, he told the story of the fifth day of Sheva Brachos. And then on the following Tuesday, so over the span of 3 weeks, he told the story Shal Yom Shishi of the sixth day of the Sheva Brachos. And after he told the story of the sixth day, we stood before him, and somebody told him some story that he heard. Anava Amar, Rebbe Nachman announced, and he said, why, that has what to do with the story of the seventh day. He said, it appears that the world is already telling my story, meaning, even though obviously he hadn't revealed it yet, but current events were reflecting elements that were included in the Yom HaShvi'i, which again is a reference to the fact that we're getting really, really close to the coming of Mashiach. We are in the seventh day now. We're getting there. And he wanted to tell it, but he didn't. He wanted to tell it, but he didn't. We didn't merit, and he never told that story ever, and he never completed the story of the seven beggars. Okay, we're going to come back to the seven beggars in a minute. Right now, let's just take a look at 150. It's a separate Torah, and then we're going to go to 151, which goes back to the telling. That's why I wanted to include it, of the seven beggars. So over here, 150, Pamachas Amar, one time Rebbe Nachman announced, and he said, Eitzel Mishani Lakeach u'Mekabel Maman v'Chayotze Ani Noisen Lei. He says, which I think is connected to the dynamic of the story of the seven beggars, where things are not as they seem, right? Or things are the opposite of the way that they appear. So he said it's like part of that energy, which is why it's ensconced between 149 and 151, which are both about the unfolding of the tale of the seven beggars. Rebbe Nachman says, if somebody gives me tzedakah, which means supports my work and supports the spreading of my teachings in the world in a healthy, holy way, he said, I'm taking, but I'm actually giving. Because although it looks like I'm the one who's receiving, they're the ones who gain. If a person is supporting the activities of being able to spread this consciousness and be able to bring people close to Hashem in this messianic, unbelievably redemptive way, it looks like they're the ones who are giving. Says Rebbe Nachman, no, I'm giving. They're the ones who are receiving. There you go. This has to do with the cripple that didn't have hands, or didn't have hands that worked. That no, even though he didn't have hands to receive, but Gevalt, all he had were hands to give. And Rebbe Nachman said he had that same element. Okay, here we continue, and with this we'll finish. I'll try to go through it quickly. Where Reb Nosson continues, Pam achas amar. I'm sorry, that was the previous one. Hold on one second. Let's go to the next piece. As we already told, after that Tuesday afternoon, where Rebbe Nachman told the story of the second day of the Sheva Brachos, on the following Friday night, he told the story of the third and fourth day of the Sheva Brachas in the story. And at that period of time, his grandson, Rebbe Nachman's grandson, was very, very ill. They had terrible sickness, and this was super common. It was very rare for children to be able to make it all the way through childbirth, and every family lost children. So that's something that we can't really grasp today. That was the reality that they lived in, and it was an incredibly painful reality. And Rebbe Nachman had such pain from this, because the sickness of this child was weighed very heavily on Rebbe Nachman. And especially because his daughter, the great tzaddikus Adol, who was obviously named after Rebbe Nachman's grandmother, who was the mother of this child, was suffering on account of the suffering of her child. Hashem yishmerna me'ata, he says, may Hashem, bless her from now. Uhuzal and Rabbi Nachman nichnas b'leil Shabbos Kodesh entered in to the Friday night Suda v'yashav al shulchan b'tzar, and he sat at the table and he was in incredible pain. V'lo nisma ma b'suda zayis klal, and he didn't spend time like just enjoying the Suda, fearing Tish, at all. Taketh b'rachna birchas hamazon, immediately, like almost right after we washed and we had Kiddush and washed, we immediately benched, even before anybody began to show up and join Rebbe Nachman. Imagine that, like you could finish your Shabbos Suda and go to Rebbe Nachman. Like that's what it was. So before anybody came to visit him, already it was over. After he benched, he stayed there by the meal. By the table. And he opened his holy, pure, and awesome mouth. And he revealed a brand new teaching, which revealed brand new Torah insights. And the whole Sicha, everything that he was teaching, had to do with the great pain that he was in. And it appears that he was speaking then about the heart, that on account of its being the heart of the structure of the klal, just like the heart of the human being feels the pain more viscerally than any other part of the body, the heart of the nation, which is the tzaddikim, feel pain in a very, very acute way. They're very sensitive people. They feel pain very, very acutely. That part is written in Likutei Moharan Tinyana Torah Beis. It's the teaching on Chanukah. And then while he was in the middle of teaching this Torah teaching, he just stopped and he announced, where are we holding in our story? The taken of Halna, the same thing, and they were just bewildered. And we answered him again with great bahala, with like astonishment and confoundment and with awe and with fear. We're up to Tuesday. Not up to Tuesday, rather we're up to the third day of Sheva Brachas. And then Rebbe Nachman began to say, and he told the whole story of how the third beggar came, because it had what to do with what was being discussed earlier. He said there was a great joy after that. They rejoiced. Then he told the story of the fourth day, the Tekev Kishgamra, Tekev Umiyad. And the minute that he finished telling the story, he immediately he ran away from the table. And that was it. Says Rabbi Nosson, because he had to remember all the details. Rabbi Nosson was Rabbi Nachman's chayzer, right? So he was the one who was like sort of recording in his memory every detail so that they would be able to write it over afterwards. So and I immediately began to review the details with the people who were there, so that one word shouldn't be forgotten. Because of that, Reb Nosson says, I completely forgot what he was teaching before that. And woe is to us for the things that we've lost. But but great praise and gratitude to the living God that we were able to record and to write down these wondrous stories, that even with a tiny little bit, Reb Nosson says that I'm able to understand of them. I don't have the capacity of expression. My mouth and my words, and Reb Nosson was like a wordsmith, she'ein kamayu. Reb Nosson, his words and his koyach of dibor and his power of expression was unparalleled. Reb Nosson says, it's impossible for me to express to other people what I feel and what I understand. From their awesome, incredible power and depth. On the following Tuesday, it was almost Pesach. They were like sort of renovating the house. They were putting plaster on all the walls for the purpose of the upcoming Chag. So we all went to Beis Harab of Arami Breslov. They went to the Rav of Breslov, who was a very close Breslov Chassid, to Rebbe Nachman, the Heilige Reb Aaron, Vishamamad to Lefanav, and there we stood in Rebbe Nachman's presence. I don't remember what we were speaking about that had something to do with the story of the sixth day. And Rebbe Nachman told over the whole story of the sixth day of the Sheva Brachas, and then something else took place which he makes veiled reference to, which we don't know. So it was very close to Pesach. Because the story over there is about a princess who gets trapped behind 10 walls of water, and there are certain arrows that are able to penetrate through the walls of water. And Rabbi Nosson says that might be an allusion to Kriyas Yamsuf, right, which obviously was in Yonah D'Yoma as they were approaching Pesach. So he says, and over there Rabbi Nosson says, I explained and expressed a little bit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has allowed me to understand with that Inyan. Haklal, the bottom line is, and this is true for the story of the Seven Beggars, it's true for a lot of the other stories, but it's true for all of Rabbi Nachman's expressions. It's true for all the Torahs on the Likutei Moharan. It's true for many, many other aspects of Rabbi Nachman's revelation. Shebechal Maisa Shesiper, all of the stories that were told, Nizgalgal Sipor Al Yidei Sichos Haran Misiach U'Medaber Imanu B'Sipurei Ha'olam. It all had to do with current events. It was all revealing deeper layers of understanding of the things that they themselves were experiencing at that time. And that was like the wildest thing about it. Because Rebbe Nachman presumably already knew the story that would be told, but then someone had a dream. And the whole dream was incorporated into the story. And it was a Pele. But the Rebbe Nachman was above time and space. Like he was, it wasn't clear, what came first. Like, did the person have the dream because of the Torah, or was the Torah because of the dream? Or things melted into higher layers of reality with the Rebbe. He was just beyond. And again, it's impossible for us to know how he did this, but it seemed like immediately Rebbe Nachman would weave everything that was being spoken about into the narrative of the story, but he already knew it. But it was exactly what we were speaking about that he couldn't have known what would be spoken about. And it was just a total mystery. This was an aspect of an awakening from below. Right? There needed to be like sort of catalysts or activating energies that then allowed for the story to be drawn down. And this is how it was with each and every story. Many, many Torahs that Rebbe Nachman revealed that were outside of the three primary times that the Rebbe would teach Torah, where all the Breslov Chasidim would gather in Ada Yom Hazeh. These are three huge times to go to Uman, which are obviously Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos Chanukah and Shavuos. So these were the three times that Rebbe Nachman would reveal Torah. B'Shabbos Shira, Shnas Nachamu, right, Shabbos, it should be Shabbos Nachamu, va'od Shabbos Achas, b'meshach Hashanah Nasar Rabbeinu la'Yaris Acheres. And those three Shabbos, Rabbi Nachman would travel to other places, and va'amar Sham Torah. So outside of these set times throughout the year. If Rebbe Nachman was just revealing Torah, it had to do with things that were happening then and there. And we saw the awesome wonders of Hashem. It didn't make sense. It was beyond our ability to grasp. The maila of this tzaddik, he found Torah in everything. Every single thing was just Torah. There was no separation. There was no, like Chazal say, the Sichos Haran shel Talmidei Chachamim is divrei Torah, right? Because there was no separation by him between Kodesh and Chol. Chol was Kodesh. The Klipas Noiga was completely sanctified and elevated up into Chashmal, like we've been learning in Likutei Moharan Shiurim in Torah Yud Tes. That's how the tzaddik lived. So everything was Torah by him. Ach b'yoyser v'yoyser re'inu zois etzel sipur ha'maisa anara zois shel hashivim betlers. Reb Nosson says, more so than any of the other stories, and more so than any of the other teachings in Likutei Moharan, we saw this with the story of the seven beggars, shechidushim niflaim v'nayroim nizgavim ad ein kates, that are there's just no words for it. You have to see it for yourself, right? The novelty and the awesome depth is totally infinite. Kasher yavan amevin ma'at. If a person is able a little bit to understand, they'll understand ba'atzmai themselves. If they'll really focus on them and open themselves up with humility to the deeper meanings and to the insights, and to search and to see and to seek, and therefore to find. Lahavin lahaskil, to understand and to know. And noyer ois kedushas esparish shakol echad v'echad anaskarim shemachal yom v'yom. The awesome pride that each of the beggars was taking in their own handicap, which was at the same time their greatest gift and their greatest awesome wonder. That of course the tzaddik Rebbe Nachman is the klalius of all. He had all of the different gifts that were spoken about over there, playing out through each of the various beggars, which are each different aspects of the tzaddik emes kiyadua. Obefrat gedulas kedushas esparis hashiva betlers ba'atzman shemesparim v'chol yom v'yom. Each of the aspects that the cripples, that the beggars were priding themselves, that they had reached such incredible spiritual levels that it made it appear as if they were physically handicapped, but only because spiritually that those capacities were so remarkably powerful. Right? What it mean? He was blind. He's like, you think I'm blind? I'm not blind. I could see much, much, much better than anybody else. So what does it mean that I show up as blind? No, it only means that I don't look at this world at all. I'm blind from this world. I'm only plugged in to higher realities. I don't see with my physical eyes, but I see with my spiritual lenses. So that's what it means in relation to the physical world. The blind one is blind. He's not really blind. He could see better than anybody else. The same idea. The person, the cripple who's deaf, right? The deaf beggar. Right? It doesn't mean that he doesn't hear. It just means that he doesn't hear sounds of this world and take them too seriously, as is revealed over there in the story of Alkeinu Cheresh v'chulu, etc., etc. V'chein kol dibur v'dibur shel zayis hamayis Hashem kulam chidushim niflaim. Right? That every word of this story are all awesome novelties and wonders, gam lafi psichos da'atenu, even in accordance with our own very limited level of understanding. Aval pi she'ein ana mevinim oisam klal, we don't understand any of it, not any of the stories, certainly not the seven beggars. That's arguably the most exalted of them all. V'chalas kalas hazayis hakol al yedei sipuri dvar me'eskei ha'olam. And this all came about from mundane conversations. Rebbe Nachman loved the news. He said, I don't know how a Jew can live without the news. Just small things that were happening, stuff going on in people's lives, different aspects, elements, things. And then the Rebbe said, nothing is stam. Nothing is stam. There's Torah here. There's spiritual value here. And the Rebbe would lift it out of the mundane garments and crystallize and clarify and purify and reveal the glowing gems of insight and meaning and kirvas elikim litayv that exists beyond the surface. Al yadam nizgalgal shecham aleinu v'chem l'gedola v'yasera. So it's unbelievable, because if you notice, Reb Nosson is encoding into this whole piece. All right, for example, like just go back a couple of lines. He said over here, right, lahavin ulahaskil, right? So he uses terminology of lahavin ulahaskil, and then over here he uses very terminology chamal aleinu bechemla gedala v'yasera chamalta aleinu, right? It's terminology that's taken from the bracha of Avarabba or Avas Olam before Kriya Shema. That over there it's referring to the Torah Kedusha, and Chemla Gedolah is speaking about Hashem, right? Chemla Gedolah Chamalta Aleinu, right? That Hashem had great mercy on us and He gave us His Torah. And over here, Reb Nosson is using obviously Lahavdal Elef Avdalis, obviously because of that saying, but Reb Nosson is encoding this terminology to enable us to understand that Rebbe Nachman's Torah is like a new Kabbalah Satira. It is the Torah Chadasha Mi'iti Teitze. It is the revelation of the Torah Da'atika Stima, of the Torah of Mashiach, that Mashiach will one day explain all of these things to us. But we have to approach it with the same passion. It is a brand new revelation of Torah. That's really what it is. And if a person appreciates that, so we take it as seriously, it really is. It's Torah min hashamayim. It really is. It's Giluyim Atzumim that came down through the Rebbe. Kiyadua, without going too deeply into it, the story of the Maaseh Milechem, Rebbe Nachman was mamish mekabel the Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, and he transmitted a brand new layer. Obviously, it's all integrated into Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah, and not 1 inch deviates from that. Chas v'chalila, right? There will never be a new Torah that emerges from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's one of the 13 commandments, Chas v'shalom. But the pasuk says Torah mi'iti teitzeh, and Chazal darshan Torah chadasha mi'iti teitzeh. There is a new gilui, there's a new revelation of Torah. And that's what Reb Nosson is intimating here, and he's coding it in, that he's using terminology that is generally used for us to understand the Torah from the standpoint of Hashem's having given it to us. And over here he codes in, right, that Rabbi Nachman was chamal aleinu b'chemla g'dayla v'yisera. And with his great compassion and mercy, he channeled down, like Moshe Rabbeinu, he channeled down a new level of Torah that enables us to interact with Torah's Moshe in a completely different way, with completely new lenses and a completely new understanding and context and framing, and something that's literally applicable to our generation in a way that it might not have been applicable in his generation, which is why I don't know if we've already learned this inside in Sichos Haran, but we've certainly mentioned it in the past. The Rebbe Nachman said, my Torah is not for our generation. He said, many times I'll say things that are not at all understandable or relevant for now, but you'll pass it to your children, they'll pass it to their children, and later, there will be a generation to rise up who understands Tov what I was talking about. I believe with all my heart and soul that we are the generation. We are the generation. And slowly but surely we're starting to recognize this man was, he wasn't just the Breslover Rebbe for Breslover Hasidim. This was a Moshe Rabbeinu figure. This was an archetypal figure, like a Rebbe Shimon figure, an Arizal figure. He was a Rebbe for the whole. He wasn't like a Rebbe, like we have this Hasidim and that Hasidim and Breslover Hasidim, and this is their Rebbe. We have to understand that this is a completely different kind of soul. This is an neshama that changed everything. It's just a brand new sort of system update on Yiddishkeit in general. It's an evolution that is necessary to bring us closer and closer and closer to the Geula by expanding our consciousness. And again, Reb Nosson understood that. That's why he wanted to record every single tiny detail, because he understood that it wasn't just for his little group, and it wasn't for even Breslover Hasidim. This was going to be necessary for every single member of Klal Yisrael, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say for every single human being on the planet. This is mamish, the whole human history was going to depend on the recording of this individual's insights, which were going to be necessary for every human being in the world to be able to get us to a point of expanded consciousness, so that finally the Psukim and Navi could be fulfilled, which tell us about a time when Umala Aretz Deas Hashem Kamayim Li'amachasim, the whole world will be filled with the awareness of Hashem like water covers the ocean floor. So al yadam nis galgal v'chamal aleinu v'chemel gedoyle v'yasera kazais. Where the Rebbe had such compassion on us, because he could have kept it to himself, and he could have just, but he didn't. The Rebbe's whole thing was to transmit the deepest levels of perception and asaga to the lowliest of people, to make sure that everyone is able to connect to Hashem on that level. So that forever, until the end of time, it should be yitav. We should be able to live good lives. That's the whole purpose of all of this. That we should be able to live mamish good lives. Lanu ulevanenu ad olam. And he closes Amale in an asipor yemaisi shesiper. Rebbe Nachman said, as a general comment on all of the stories that he told, which are again printed in the Sefer Sipurei Maasiyos, which everyone should try to get their hands on, even just to own it, even if you're not going to have time to just to put it on your shelf, to have it in your homes, very, very, very dear and precious, and I'm sure a big segula. So Rebbe Nachman said, as a general comment, it would have been better for the tikkun not to explain anything about the Torah allusions that are interwoven into the narrative of the lesson. Because then it's able to go into the neshama and do its work, even without making any reference to where in the Torah, different Torah sources in Chazal, in Psukim, in Tanakh, that are encoded within the story, and the different elements of the story are symbols to different psukim, different kapitelach tehillim, different things that Rebbe Nachman reveals after many of the stories. He said it would have been much more spiritually effective not to reveal the sources and let the story just be. So why did he reveal? Because Rebbe Nachman doesn't want people making the mistake of thinking that he was in the habit of just writing short stories for literary purposes. So you had to give us a little bit of a taste, so we should know the awesome, extraordinary spiritual source of these tales. And then a little bit that we're able to know gives us a little taste of how much we don't know, and how much more details that there are, and how many more secrets there are that are encoded into these details, each of which, like we learned at the beginning of this year, is crucially important. So we can't miss out on one of the details, because every single letter and word, like with everything in the Rebbe's revelation, was so midugdak, was so precise, it was so mindful, it was so conscious, that a person should recognize what it is that we're reading when we read it. And it's just mysteries. One day we'll know. I told somebody earlier today, I hope to live a long life, Be'ezus Hashem, with all of us. But there are parts of me that look forward to leaving. I want to know. And all the while that we're trapped, I'll never get to. But this is going to be our Olam Haba. This is going to. One day we'll know. One day we'll know. One day we'll understand. And the more that we connect to this in this world, the more that Be'ezus Hashem, for all eternity, we're gonna be able to bask in the infinite light of this person's hasaga, and in the light of Kirvas Elokim, which is the ultimate purpose of all of what Rebbe Nachman taught, was not to get close to Rebbe Nachman, was to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to become people who don't have a leiv even anymore, a hard stone, but have a leiv basar, have a heart of flesh, a feeling heart, a compassionate heart, a heart full of emunah, a heart full of belief in Hashem that gives us strength to believe in ourselves, a heart that enables us mamish to rise up and to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended us to do in this world, to serve as His kingdom of priests, as His holy nation, to reach the whole entire world with this das, the kedusha, to bring us close, Be'ezus Hashem, to the time that's described as a time when Az eshpech ruchi al kol basar, when Hashem says, I'll pour out my spirit upon all flesh. And we should v'aviyosem on our kachri v'semachta v'beis tefilasi, or they say v'chayim l'ratz al hamizbechi ki beis tefila yikari l'chol ha'amim, when all humanity can get together again, and we can link arms, and we can stop fighting, and we can climb out of pettiness, and we can recognize our shared humanity, and we can relate to each other with empathy and with humility, and all together we can come back to our shared source, the source of our tselem elokim, chaviv adam shenivra b'tselem, to return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Be'ezras Hashem, this is what we're davening for and yearning for, and Rebbe Nachman's teachings are going to help us get there. Siyata d'shmaya. Okay, Yasher Kayach, so I'm really happy that we managed to get through all of this, because it was quite lengthy, but it was all one Indian, so I figured, let's try to do it all together. If there are any questions, I'm on for another couple of minutes, and then I do have to run. But if anybody wants to share, if you have anything you'd like to ask or add, The floor is open. Okay, Adkan. Good. Thank you so much, Chevra. Thank you. And again, really highly encouraged if you can get your hands on Sipurei Maisis. If you've never read it before, you're in for a treat like you have no idea. It's the most remarkable thing. So really highly encouraged if you can afford and purchase a copy, or you can go online. It's all for free. I'm sure you can find it online. I believe it's on Sefaria. I don't want to say for sure, but I think it is. And just enjoy and bask in it and revel in it, even if you don't understand anything. That's part of the joy of it. We're so humble, we're so simple. What do we know? But what a privilege that we're among the very, very few that are pioneers who manage to be humble enough, open enough, seeking enough to be connected to this light. And it's on us to bring it to as many people as we possibly can. I'm just doing it in my way, but each and every one of us is expected to do it in our own unique ways. Every single one of us, to the extent that we can, to increase this art in the world. And Be'ezras Hashem, we should continue to share only good news, and wishing everybody the most remarkable week up ahead. Thank you all for joining.
שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי, מלך חי וקיים, על כל נשימה שאני